On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, the Memphis Grizzlies looked better against the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's so weird. I wonder what changed in a week. We'll discuss that, plus the unluckiness of Memphis around this time of year on St. Patrick's Day. And we will preview a road trip for the Grizzlies that maybe before the season looked a lot more important than it is now. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your co-host for this episode. Always wonderful to be able to say that because that means Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee is by my side. A tremendous co-host. No one I'd rather be with on this Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies than Damichael, and no one we would rather have with us than you as we start another week together here on Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We at Locked On Grizzlies are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, wherever you get it. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Make Damichael and myself part of your NBA consumption each and every day. Doesn't matter where you get it. Just make sure you get your Locked On Grizzlies fix each and every time an episode drops. Damichael, it's good to see you in good spirits. Clearly, things weren't too wild down in Memphis for St. Patrick's Day. You're responding well. You're detoxing well, whatever the case might be. But you look good. You look spry, and you look ready to talk about leading off this episode of the show.
Yeah.
Geez, goodness gracious, Damichael Cole. The Grizzlies played the Oklahoma City Thunder a little over a week ago now, right? And wow, did they look bad. 30
got
point
blasted.
Woo, blasted by the Thunder. And just a continued acknowledgement by myself, in fairness, and others, that OKC has passed Memphis by for now. Then all of a sudden, these two teams play again, right? And it's still a Thunder victory. That's important to point out. But the games were very different in terms of how they were played, in terms of the competition level. I wonder what the difference was, Damichael Cole. Maybe you can help us since you're there as the commercial appeals beat writer for the Memphis Grizzlies. You've been paying attention. What was the difference between those two games, would you say?
It was simple. Taylor Jenkins just coached better. But
that's all it was. That was it. He finally figured it out.
Wait. I know what it is, Joe. Oh. It's this thing with coaching. Oh. When you get better players on the floor.
You look smarter because the players are better.
Isn't that something?
That's
so.
It.
So guess what?
You got it.
This guy comes back named Jaren Jackson Jr. He missed a couple games, but he's an all-star before. Then there's this other guy. Can't really. He's been out a couple months. I don't really remember his name really well. Desmond Bane. That's who. That's
yeah. He was in the Batman movie. Bane.
Yeah. That's him. The Desmond Bane guy comes back, right? And he first possession of the game. Makes a corner three-pointer. Then I remembered exactly who he was. He was a guy who shot over 40% from three-point range his entire NBA career. And when I talked to him the other day at the zoo, I said, Des, you're under 40% from three-point range right now. You're going into that game, he was at 38.8%, I believe it was. I said, is it a goal of yours? And he basically said, I'm not worried about it. You know what I do. And we saw what he do. Desmond Bane looked good. 7 of 17 from the field, 7 assists to go along with that. And the biggest takeaway for me, when you talk about this being a better loss for the Grizzlies, it's the carryover effect. Like in terms of Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. being on the floor. Like Jaren's played with these guys, more so Des. He was plus 11, Joe. Like that stood out to me. Desmond Bane was plus 11 in 32 minutes. The Grizzlies lost that game, by 6 points. Basically, in the 16 minutes that he didn't play, they were 17 points worse than the Oklahoma City Thunder in 16 minutes.
There was only one other Grizzlies player that was a positive on the night, to your point, and that was Jake LaRavia. So I'm guessing he must have logged a lot of time with Desmond Bane.
How much of a
he was
positive?
+4.
Not even close.
Right, yeah. You're exactly right.
It was so clear that when he stepped on that floor, this team was drastically better. And I asked him like a long-winded question after the game because I wanted to make sure I conveyed it properly to him from the standpoint of, he's a real student of the game. Desmond Bane, we've talked about it a lot, how he's a student of the game. And I just wanted to get in his mind a little bit from the standpoint of, what did you work on specifically to be this type of impactful player? Like, it's one thing to improve individually. Like, we talk about those type of guys all the time. But it says something else about you. When you step on the floor, Luke Kennard looks better. Jake LaRavia looks better. Jaren Jackson Jr. has arguably one of his most complete games from an efficiency standpoint. Jaren Jackson Jr. had 7 assists. Like, all these guys, Santi Aldama, looked like the player me and you've been looking for the past couple months. He looked like that guy. The reverse dunks, knocking down the three-pointers, going off the dribble, making nice passes. Each starter had 4 or more assists. And it seems as simple as they plugged in a guy who is a very connector. And Des makes it sound simple. Oh, it's just making the right play. And I want to say, come on, Des. It's way deeper than just 2 guys come at you, you swing it to the next guy. There is an impact, and not to compare him to these type of players, but there are only certain players in the NBA. We seen it with Ja, right? In those 9 games when he played, the Grizzlies looked drastically better. And I want to be clear about this because this is not something that's been new with Desmond Bane. Earlier in the season, Joe, what were we talking about a lot? We were talking about the lack of depth. When Des was in the game, the Grizzlies were in a lot of close games. When they went 6-19, Desmond Bane was playing well. It would be when he went out of the game, we were talking about how they were trying to stagger Jaren and Des. And when he went out of the game, things would sink. And that's kind of, what happened in that fourth quarter against the Thunder.
That's exactly what happened. I think you paid him a pretty lofty compliment just now, and I agree with it. Bane is reaching the Ja stratosphere. And what I mean by that is not in terms of leapability, athleticism, superstardom, nothing like that. He is reaching that place in terms of importance for the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah.
You nailed it in terms of how he helped these guys. The one guy, unfortunately, and this is a data point that we need to continue to monitor. It'll be something we talk about later on in the show about the upcoming road trip.
Yeah.
The one guy that looked out of place, the one guy whose name you didn't mention, was Gigi Jackson, who drew the start in this game, and he did not have his best offensive outing of the season. 5 of 14, 2 of 8 from 3. And again, we want to see him next to Bane throughout the rest of the year. And it's just one game. I want to stress that. Again, there's a larger
and Gigi talked about that after the game, right, too. Mm-hmm. Like he what stood out to me, and I think those two will be fine. Like
I would agree.
Yeah, and I'm sure you do. But here's what he said after the game, which was kind of revealing to me, Joe. He basically said that the last week or so, when he knew that Des was coming back, he was kind of concerned from the standpoint of how they would play together. He hasn't logged minutes with Bane this season up until this point. He was kind of concerned of how it would work. And then he said when they were on the floor, it was easy. And that alone leads me to believe, if you watched him in that game, first half, Gigi Jackson was exactly how I probably figured it would go. It looked like he was just filling it out. He wasn't really shooting much. He was taking, he wasn't dribbling much. Second half, early in the second half, he got aggressive. He's going to the cup. He did the little swipe down offensive move that he likes to do to draw the fouls and things like that. He was getting aggressive, and I said, there it is. They must have said something to him in the locker room, said, hey. And Dez's main point to Gigi throughout all this, play your game. Be exactly who you are. I think those two will be fine, but you definitely pointed it out. I do think there's an adjustment period there for Gigi Jackson.
And we have to remember, ideally, right, and obviously there will be more time for this going into the offseason, Gigi Jackson is not going to be a starter for this team, right? If you want to have a Vince Williams Jr. versus Marcus Smart debate, that sounds like a future episode of Locked On Grizzlies to me. But Gigi Jackson, I don't think anybody's going to be clamoring for him to be a starter on a team that's trying to contend for an NBA championship as a 20-year-old, the age he'll be this time next year. He's probably a bench bucket getter, and that's what they want him to be. But he's still going to be logging minutes alongside Bane in that role. So that's one of the reasons that data point is significant. But it was one game. It was good to see the team compete. You're exactly right about Jaren Jackson Jr. He looked like a brand new man. Love watching Luke Kennard continue to have success. Wasn't the most explosive game in terms of shooting, but again, 9 assists.
High five to Joe Mullinax. Who would have thought?
Me, Joe Mullinax would have thought it, but that's all right. Everybody will yell at me about something later on this week. I'm sure that I say that's dumb. But anyway, I digress. When we come back, here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael and I are going to talk a little bit of the luck of the Irish, right? St. Patrick's Day was yesterday. Memphis has not been the luckiest team this year. How much of it has to do with luck with regard to injuries, all the other things, and how much of it is stuff that the Grizzlies can improve upon moving forward? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It's not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals with a B. That makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else, and LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Make yours the next one if you don't already use it. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedon. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba. LinkedIn.com/lockedonnba. Post your job for free. Again, one more time, linkedin.com/lockedonnba. Terms and conditions apply. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will be discussing luck in the Memphis Grizzlies, where it all plays out. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole, the commercial appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. I am always lucky to work with Damichael Cole, but we'll talk about whether or not Memphis has had some bad luck this season here momentarily. Before we do that, I want to remind you, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. If you're a baseball fan, I follow the Nationals, unfortunately. Damichael, of course, loves his Atlanta Braves. Mark your calendars for March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The best MLB season preview is coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Damichael, you're lucky to be a Braves fan. I'm unlucky to be a Washington Nationals fan. You're lucky to be in the position you are, very fortunate to have the job as a beat writer covering the Memphis Grizzlies for the commercial appeal. And I am lucky to be a co-host with an award-winning journalist of your stature. The Memphis Grizzlies, I don't think anybody would call lucky this season. All the various injury numbers. There's so many different research for this topic for today's show. I could give you 10 different X accounts, websites that measure injury impact on NBA teams. And guess who's at the top of each and every list? The Memphis Grizzlies. And that doesn't even take into account the Ja Morant suspension. Now, some of these things are of our own doing or of their own doing, maybe is the better way to say it, like Ja Morant suspension. Hard to feel bad for anybody regarding that. That's Ja Morant's responsibility. Even The Rock in Memphis, Tennessee on SmackDown on Friday night was having Ja catch some heat in terms of his concert that he put on for WWE fans. So some of it is self-inflicted, as we've discussed ad nauseum here on Locked On Grizzlies. Other parts of it, it's so hard to measure. And again, you're so connected to the team, you're going to have a great insight on this. I have talked about the medical team, right? The training staff. How much of it do they have to do with it? How much of it is the players playing too much or not working out enough? Is it some kind of convoluted mess that we can't really decipher? And we just write it off as bad luck coming out of this St. Patrick's Day. Where do the Grizzlies fit on that spectrum for you when it comes to this concept of luck or being unlucky?
Yeah, it's when you talk about soft tissue injuries, that's when I think there needs to be an evaluation of the medical staff. Soft tissue injuries, growing injuries, hamstring injuries, and conditioning things where it's like, what's going on with the medical staff? A guy's not dieting right, a guy's not eating properly, a guy's not preparing properly. But in the case of this team, I know that's the route that everyone wants to go in terms of how they're handling these things. I know we can go all the way back to the Steven Adams injury. There were some questions there, but I always like to point out the fact, like, if we want to talk about the Steven Adams situation, you have to remember that players have input, and as a medical staff,
it is their body after all.
It's their body. And they can't, if you suggest for a player to have surgery and the player says, no, I want to wait, It's their body. And of course, at the end of the day, the medical staff will be the ones who take the most heat because of that, because you're not privy to the conversations between a player and so said medical staff members and whatnot. But getting deeper into it, Ja Morant's injury, right? Guy was working out. Shoulder pops out of place. Out for the season. How often do we see that? That's not a common NBA.
Not a common thing, no.
Desmond Bane going up for a shot, twists his ankle, and you say, oh, guys twist their ankle all the time. Tie his shoe tighter, he'll be fine.
Happened to Sengun for the Houston Rockets recently. I think they both were grade 3 ankle sprains.
Grade 3. You do not see a lot of grade 3. You see a grade 1 where a guy will leave the game, tie his shoe up, come right back in. You'll see a grade 2, guys miss 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending. I think back to Dylan Brooks a couple years ago when he missed like from January to March. I think that was like a grade 2. But Baines was a little bit more serious. Marcus Smart, the guy made a 3-pointer jump. He just looks at his finger and is like, oh, snap. This is out of place. Like, these injuries aren't necessarily, oh, boy, it's the fourth. Like, these are different than, okay, Jaren with the right quad tendonitis. Like, those are, if you see more of those type of injuries popping up, that's where I would turn my direction to the medical staff. And the injuries that we've seen, like, especially with those 3 players, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, and whatnot, and Derrick Rose. I don't think we even have to go down that avenue, because you've been one of the main people who've been on saying that, talking about his injury history as a player. But with all that being said, I think it's hard for me to put the blame on them in this situation. Like, if it was soft tissue injuries, if it were a lot more of the right quad tendonitis, or you remember last year when there were more like soreness injuries, left knee soreness, left eye soreness, all these type of things. They're dealing with real blows. Like, to put it in perspective, Jordan Goodwin, remember, came on a 10-day hardship exception.
Yep.
Shaq Harrison, 10-day injury hardship exception. Jalen Noel, 10-day injury hardship exception. Trey Jemison, 10-day injury hardship exception. Wenyen Gabriel, 10-day injury hardship. DeJon Jarreau. Like, that's 7 guys that are just named off the top of my head. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but that's 7 guys who've been able to play with the Grizzlies this season because of not just nicks and bruises where it's like, oh, the medical staff made a mistake here or there. These are injuries where you can't get guys on injury hardship exceptions unless you have players out for a long period of time. So you talk about a guy's shoulder coming out of place, something you probably won't see at all for the rest of this season or next season. And Desmond Bane twisting his ankle, like you said, Sengun and whatnot, but it's still not just your everyday ankle sprain. I'm gonna put a little pressure off of them, though. I know you got a little bit more heat for them than me, which I want to hear what you have to say if that's the way, the angle that you're gonna take. But for me, I just feel like if there were more of those soft tissue injuries, I would be questioning more of the Grizzlies' stance on this. But these have been big, brutal blows.
I think it's important to point out that these players have more money than they've ever had before. Excuse me. And as a result of that, they have larger support staffs individually than they've ever had before, right? You would be more privy to this kind of information than me, but they all have their own shooting coaches. They all have their own trainers. They all have their own masseuses, chefs, whatever the case might be. Maybe not all of them. That's a bit of hyperbole. But especially the big money guys, you see someone like LeBron James, who gets pointed at all the time, doing phenomenal things. I think he posted a 40.8 rebound, 9 assist game, something like that, against the Warriors over the weekend. This dude's 39 years old. He's older than me. And I prove every day on Locked On Grizzlies just how old I am. And he is 2 years older than I am, doing phenomenal things at the very peak of NBA athleticism. LeBron is one of one. I think most of us can agree, at least from the physical standpoint, right? Like, you can't compare him and Jordan that way for a variety of reasons. If there was a Locked On Grizzlies After Dark, maybe we could talk about some of those. But Jordan and LeBron, if you want to say Jordan's better than him as a basketball player, obviously I can hear that conversation. In terms of sustainability and longevity, it's not a competition. Like, it's LeBron James. And I think players see what LeBron has done. He talks about investing $1 million or a couple $1 million every year in keeping his body. More and more of them are doing that. Not all of them are the quality of LeBron James's, is the point I'm trying to make. So I think sometimes you overwork. I think sometimes you overinvest in stuff like that, and it can negatively impact you. So believe it or not, I'm going to side with you more than I thought I would in this conversation. I do wish that there were more updates.
Yeah,
that's PR, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is directly connected to how the Grizzlies have always sold themselves, at least under the Robert Parra regime. That's not a new thing. Yeah. So I think that that's going to be a point of emphasis for me, is continuing to get that clarity on this stuff. Yeah. But in terms of the training staff themselves, I'm actually going to go a little easy on them, believe it or not.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Everything you said is fair. I know a lot of people see soreness and, they kind of lax a little bit. With Ja, it was shoulder soreness, and people are like, oh, okay. And then, I told you ahead of time, but I kind of started hearing that things were worse than we probably expected. And it was the same.
And that is true. Damichael did nail it.
And that's happened a couple times. Like guys get soreness and people say, oh, it's just some soreness. Luke Kennard, it happened with him. The next thing you know, it's 2 or 3 weeks, and people are like, well, where did this come from? But I think, it's a cautionary, like the Grizzlies try to operate out of this caution, and that's kind of how it plays out for them. But yeah, you are 100% right. It's kind of the way this regime, like they're very careful with what they reveal from the injury standpoint. Even beyond the Grizzlies, you're starting to see more franchises in the NBA. If you look at the language, they're starting to say more things like, said player will be reevaluated in 3 weeks. There are no teams are doing less of giving an exact timeline of when a player will come back, and more so when they will reevaluate that player. Like with Marcus Smart, he doesn't have a quote-unquote timeline. His reevaluation point is pretty much coming up here, though. So I think that's the way they've handled it. And again, unlucky is the best way to put it to me.
Reevaluation time. They're going to reevaluate and find, oh man, Marcus Smart's veteran tail is going to have the rest of the season off. That's probably how that's going to work. No inside information there. Damichael didn't give me any scoops. That's just how I foresee that happening. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, whether they're lucky or unlucky, they've got a 4-game road trip coming up. We're going to see that, look at those games, and kind of talk about things to watch for coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Stitch Fix. You know that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good. Like, look at Damichael Cole and I today. Look at us. We're both rocking the white tees. We're feeling confident on this Monday, and you should feel that level of confidence too. Stitch Fix can help you get there. Easily upgrade your wardrobe this year with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that will work for you. Stitch Fix makes it all easy. I hate to shop. I got to be honest with you. You can tell by the white t-shirt. But they save me time and effort every time I check them out. Plus, I get outfits that make me look good and feel really good, which, of course, is the most important thing. And the best part is, if you don't love something, you can just send it back. Shipping, returns, exchanges are always free. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out the show, looking ahead to the road trip. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Award-winning Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal. I am not award-winning, but I'm happy to be along for the ride. And I'm happy
you're award-winning, Joe.
Maybe once upon a time, but it's been a while. Happy to be here. Damichael's phenomenal, as everybody knows, and I am a happy co-host with him each and every time we get the chance here on Locked On Grizzlies. But partner, I don't know if you know this or not. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. You're going to be flying solo a couple of times coming up here. For anybody that's an everydayer to Locked On Grizzlies, you know that I'm very old and washed. And this is a West Coast road trip that is occurring, starting with the game tonight against the Sacramento Kings. And then Wednesday, it's on ESPN, but it is a game at Golden State Warriors. Those are 2 games that I'm going to be tapping out on. So for those episodes,
Joe catch up with us after the fact.
Yeah, the much younger and much more able to stay awake that late, Damichael Cole is going to be with you guys. But I'll be watching the games, of course, and I'll be on a couple episodes this coming week. What are some things to watch for going into this road trip? Because I talked about a couple of the games. The Kings, very much in the playoff mix. The Warriors, very much in the play-in mix. The Spurs in a similar boat to the Memphis Grizzlies right now. And then you got the Nuggets, the defending champs. So 3 of the 4 games figure to be pretty challenging. But again, the Grizzlies just went toe-to-toe with the Thunder, who are one of the best teams in the NBA this season. Wins are not as important. We've talked about that here, there, and everywhere. What are you looking for going into this road trip from a more macro view of the roster? Obviously, Bane next to G.G. Jackson, perhaps a returning Vince Williams Jr. over the next few games. Whatever the case might be, what are some things you're looking for as the Grizzlies? I would say head west, but they have the weird game at San Antonio, and then they go back out to Denver. So 4-game road trip is the better way to put it, and then they'll be back in Memphis to take on the Lakers on the 27th. That'll be the next home game for them.
There's a lot of continuity that needs and can take place over this road trip that'll give us more clarity on who and how certain players belong on the roster going forward. Scottie Pippen Jr., for example, we've talked about the idea of him, hanging on next season on his 2-way deal, and talked about the idea of him possibly. I mean, maybe it's a long shot at this point, but it's still very possible that he could be that 15th guy who gets that final spot on this roster as well. And with that being the case, I want to see him, play more with a Desmond Bane and play in a bench role maybe, or whether it's a starting role. And when I talk about continuity, we want to see more of these guys on the floor. Like we watched this last game. The starters looked good, and mainly that was because of Desmond Bane. But the bench, I think John Conchar gave you some solid minutes. Jake LaRavia had 14 points, but it was mainly second half where he came alive. Outside of that, you didn't get much. And then William Gabriel's 10-day deal is up. So, he just played a few minutes there. Trey Jemison didn't play. Jordan Goodwin didn't play. But at the end of the day, I want to see some type of continuity from the standpoint of we should go into the second or third game of this road trip saying, we know what the starting five is going to be. We know what the next guy's group is going to be. Vince Williams.
Yeah, that's a big one for me.
He's got to enter that starting lineup, right? Like G.G. Jackson is our guy. But Vince Williams got to enter that starting lineup. You throw him in that starting lineup, or are you taking out a Luke Kennard after he just had 9 assists? Do you want to continue to build on that? Or are you putting in Scottie Pippen Jr. in place of Luke Kennard and bringing Luke Kennard off the bench? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer either way. I just think whatever is done needs to be with the thought of next season in mind. That's my mentality. Like, personally, I think it would be just fine if you start Scottie Pippen Jr., but I'd like to bring him off the bench, in a role as well. I'd like to put Vince Williams in the starting lineup. I'd like to bring G.G. Jackson off the bench so he can be kind of that, that scorer off the bench that we talked about the Grizzlies needing, because he's probably not going to start next season. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most. Like, I think we can get some more clarity. Like that lineup that they used against OKC, that was the first time, 41st lineup of the season for the Grizzlies. How about that? 41 lineups already. And it was a good lineup. Luke Kennard, Desmond Bane. I think, Luke Kennard, Desmond Bane, G.G. Jackson, Santi Aldama, Jaren Jackson Jr. You know what I said? I said, I'm not sure, Joe. I'm going to have to go check. But I think that's the first time in like a pretty long time where we've seen a lineup where we can say, it's going to be 5 guys that'll probably be in a rotation next season.
Finally, right? That's a pleasant surprise. I agree with you to an extent. Like G.G. Jackson, I don't need to see him as a starter anymore. I don't need to see it because I know he's not going to be a starter on this team. Vince Williams Jr., we can have that conversation. We will have that conversation on Locked On Grizzlies, and I want to see him start. I would have G.G. go back to the bench and still get plenty of minutes just as that reserve scorer, like we've talked about. I would keep starting Luke Kennard for beyond the obvious reason of me being a Kennard stan. The reality is Luke Kennard is a veteran in the league now. You could start Luke Kennard 1 game. You could start him 10 games. He'd go back to the bench in game 11. And while consistency is important, for him, he has more experience in being in that in and out, moving around as a piece role than these younger guys do. I'm more concerned about consistency for these younger players. If you think Vince Williams Jr. can be your starter, he needs to get that run. If you think that G.G. Jackson can be your 6-man scorer, he needs to get that run. You want a larger sample size of them doing the things that, again, when this team is supposed to be good again around this time next year, right? We're talking about, a top 2 or 3 seed, hopefully, as opposed to the lottery. When Memphis is back in that role, which of these guys are going to be in the best position to help contribute? That's what I want to continue to see the progression. We're not going to get that answer in these 4 road games, but we can definitely get into a more steady rotation to build up that data.
Yeah, and I'm 100% with you there. Like, a steady rotation is pretty much the main thing that I think we want to see. Because, and honestly, I don't know if we're going to see that, because you're going to see probably little sorenesses and whatnot continue to pop up with these guys, and they're not going to push the issue. But one more thing, let's keep your Brandon Clark clock on here. He's officially, as they say in the NFL and NBA draft, he's officially on the clock. He's doing 5-on-5 now. And his 5-on-5 is a little bit different than the other guys, because it's going to be a longer ramp-up period for him. But right now, definitely not early in the road trip. I would say late end of the road trip, possibly even back when the Grizzlies get home. That's the time to start really keying in on when Brandon Clark could be back for the Grizzlies.
I'm hopeful that he comes back in that Lakers game on the 27th. I think that would be really cool for him to have that moment at home. Brandon Clark is one of those unsung pieces of this, right? He's not an unsung piece for me, because I had him back in 2019. I had Zion Williamson, and all you Memphis people are going to say you had Ja number 1. No, you didn't. Don't lie. Zion 1, Ja 2. I had RJ Barrett 3, which
I remember you telling me this. Yeah.
And I had Brandon Clark 4. And that's the truth. And we hosted a draft party when I was running Grizzly Bear Blues. We hosted a draft party at the Bluff, and we were throwing freaking blogger boy parties left and right, ordering up shots because Brandon Clark had fallen into the Grizzlies' laps. I think Clark is the 4th man here. I think the Grizzlies have clearly seen him as that. I don't know if that's the right decision or the wrong decision, but I think that's how they see him, if that makes sense. And I think he's deserving of a homecoming. He'll be loved up on regardless if he comes back late in the road trip. But I think it would be cool to see him in that comfort zone at home. That's my hope. So building up over the next week or so, and then, in about 8 or 9 days, he gets that return pop, as they say in pro wrestling terminology, as he gets back for Memphis. But let us know what you're looking for in the comments for Game Roadie, how you're going to be staying up late. I'm going to do my best to stay up so I can get some Locked On Nows in, but it's going to be like 12:30.
Speaking of the comments, Joe. Speaking of the comments, are you hip to the pause community? They were trying to tell you that you should have paused on.
I don't know what pause means. Like, was our internet bad? Like, should I have paused and waited for the? What does pause mean?
We go over the definition, but
okay,
you can go look it up, or we'll talk.
I'll Google it. Urban Dictionary is still a thing, right?
Yeah,
I can look that up.
When you say certain comments that tend to lead people to believe in another thing, you're supposed to pause them so they can get more clarity on what you actually mean. So,
what would I have done recently that would have led to people thinking I meant something else?
Or you're just talking about a lot of big things going on, and people just thought that you should pause them. That's all.
Big things like with. Oh, you must be talking about when I did the ad read the other day.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
How big Grady Dick was in Josh Lloyd's fantasy basketball.
Yeah, and
we were in the thick of it with Dick. What am I supposed to do? I mean, it's a challenging time when you have an ad read that is, Josh Lloyd is a menace. We can all agree on that. But you should be checking out Locked On Fantasy Basketball if you don't already do that. That's safe to say. So Damichael's going to teach me how to pause, and the next time we're together, Damichael will have your back talking Grizzlies basketball after the late night game. It's going to be fun. We're looking forward to it. Thank you guys so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Hopefully you're with us each and every time an episode drops. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things on YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Spotify. Make sure you're an everydayer. Each and every time an episode comes out, you're checking out Locked On Grizzlies. I appreciate it. Damichael appreciates it. We appreciate it. Until next time, stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. Hopefully the weather is beautiful as spring is about to spring across the country. We'll catch you next time on Locked On Grizzlies. Have a good one.